Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. In today's episode, we are continuing our look at the ongoing civil war taking place inside of the former state of Ethiopia. At the same time, I'm going to try and compare and contrast some of both recent world events and some not so recent world events when looking at this really dire situation that is going on specifically within the Tigray region. So, as we know right now, the Tigray region, if you haven't looked at some of my other videos, feel free to go back and look at the history of kind of what's going on. But right now, the Abiy loyalist government, the so-called federal government of Ethiopia under the leadership of Abiy Ahmed and supported by the despotic regime of Eritrea, led by Isaias Afwerki to the north of the Tigray region, continue to lay siege to the Tigray region. Now, they have been defeated militarily in terms of the attempted occupation of the Tigray region, but nonetheless, they still maintain a very active siege mentality of the state of Tigray. And I say state of Tigray because really Tigray is a de facto autonomous republic at this point. It is fully having to support itself against a multitude of what you would define as foreign and aggressive adversaries on the part of the militaries of Eritrea, and then obviously what is happening with the Abiy loyalist formations as well. But we continue to see this siege being laid on the Tigray region. We continue to see a blockade of both food and medicines that are not able to get into the Tigray region. And again, this blockade, this siege, is just not for military equipment and equipment that could possibly support the Tigrayan defense forces, but this blockade and siege is really designed to starve and eventually strangle the population of the Tigray region. Now, if we look at this conflict, and the Tigray region has approximately 6 million people, who many of whom are under the threat of starvation. And in fact, when the despotic armed forces of Eritrea had occupied the northern parts of the Tigray region, many peoples were being taken to what could only really be defined as quite possibly extermination camps inside of Eritrea. But the foreign media, really the mainstream media, outside of the general locale of East Africa, is really not covering what is happening in this conflict. And then we kind of fast forward to kind of where we're at right now with what is happening taking place between Russia and Ukraine, and you see the coverage that is going on, and you often hear uh, uh, individuals and analysts discuss the fact that NATO is not it is only a defensive alliance. It is nothing more than a defensive alliance. And I want to go back to what occurred in Yugoslavia back in the late 90s, specifically the internal security operation that the Serbians had initiated in its republic, its region of Kosovo. And because of some of this internal security activity by the Serbian military against Kosovo insurgents that were very much active in Kosovo, NATO intervened and bombed Serbia until it withdrew from Kosovo. Now, keep in mind the level of brutality that took place in Kosovo is nowhere near the level of brutality that is taking place in and around the Tigray region. Again, all media is restricted from getting into the Tigray region. all supplies, all foods, all medicines are restricted from getting into the Tigray region. You cannot get in to even see what is happening in many of these places. And again, when we fast forward into the future, and we take a close look at what occurred during the actual occupation of the Tigray region by the Eritrean army and the armed forces of the Abiy loyalist formations that occupied the Tigray region, I think we're going to find that the level of atrocities are probably on the magnitude of which you could only compare to other incredibly traumatic events throughout world history, such as events that may have happened or did happen during World War II, during the Holocaust. So again, just to compare and contrast the level of brutality that is going on now in the Tigray region and what has happened during the occupation of the Tigray region, when you compare it to some other events that immediately led to this NATO operation, such as what occurred in Kosovo. Again, the level of brutality was far less in magnitude than what we are seeing in the Tigray region. So again, if we look at recent events and we hear that the NATO expansion into Ukraine should not really resonate with the Russians. They should not worry about it because the NATO alliance is simply a defensive alliance. While I would say again, look back at what occurred in Serbia and in Kosovo. And again, this was not an issue where Serbia was invading an external country. It was dealing with an internal matter that was taking place inside of Kosovo, and that brought the full weight of the NATO alliance to bomb Serbia and eventually drive out the Serbian military and its military police formations from the Kosovo region. Furthermore, if we look at what transpired in Libya. So again, who did Libya invade? Did they invade Tunisia, and NATO had to evict the Libyan forces from Tunisia? No, that didn't happen. They didn't invade anyone, did they? No, it was a civil war. So Libya was fighting a civil war. Again, comparing and contrasting the level of brutality in terms of looking to cut off food supplies, medicines, did not occur in Libya. And yet NATO decided to bomb the living hell out of Muammar Gaddafi and eventually kill him and overthrew that government. Now, please understand, absolutely, the regime of Muammar Gaddafi was absolutely heinous and horrendous. But again, just comparing and contrasting events that are taking place now in terms of NATO is only a defensive alliance. Again, Libya attacked no standing member of NATO. It was an internal operation by Muammar Gaddafi, and it brought in again the full weight of NATO armed forces, the full weight of the alliance into Libya. And I know I'm talking about quite a few different subjects now. We're kind of delving into what is currently happening with in retrospect with Russia and Ukraine, and kind of looking at the Russian thought process of, well, maybe NATO isn't entirely a defensive alliance, which it is not. Quite frankly, it has been used in what could be defined as a offensive capacity, especially when you look at its use of NATO forces, predominantly that of the United States, that used direct kinetic force against Libya. And again, no Article 5 was initiated. There was no use of Libyan military capacity against another NATO member. as was the case in Kosovo and the former Yugoslavia again. But again, very interesting to see how conflicts, how these very powerful nation states pick and choose who they decide to intervene on whose behalf. And again, if you have a case that could very well be pointed to that exceeds some of the calamity that was caused, say, in Kosovo or even Libya, where we did see international intervention. Again, case in point, we're seeing that now, and probably far, far, far greater in terms of what is happening inside of the Tigray region. So very, very significant ongoing state of affairs that is just incredibly brutal, and yet it attracts very little interest from some of these very powerful nation states that ended up acting in places such as Libya, such as Yugoslavia. But again, it's really kind of the overall strategic equation, and then obviously oil and maybe a little bit of gold in terms of what was going on within the context of Libya. So again, I think people harken back to what occurred in Rwanda, and they say, maybe never again. Well, I would say that the events that are now taking place in the Tigray region and other parts of the former state of Ethiopia, while maybe not to the extreme level of what happened in Rwanda, I would say the concept of not allowing food, water, and basic humanitarian supplies into a region could be on that scale. Obviously, there may not be great groups of people running around with machetes hacking people's heads off, but at the same time, starvation can be an absolutely just as brutal tool as someone coming into one's residence with a machete. So again, just to compare and contrast and kind of look at some things that are going on in the world and talk about them, and especially the misnomer that we continue to hear in some of the mainstream media reports that NATO is only a defensive alliance. So again, Serbia was not attacking any standing NATO member. Muammar Gaddafi in Libya had not invaded anyone, and yet NATO was utilized, and much of NATO's capabilities was definitely utilized in what you could only say is removing the Gaddafi regime, and then eventually it led to the downfall of the regime that was in Serbia as well. But again, just wanted to compare and contrast those events that are taking place or have taken place, looking at what is taking place now, and between Russia and Ukraine. And I get it that if Russia does launch this invasion into Ukraine, it obviously is going to have a great negative impact on the Ukrainian people, and obviously. The Ukrainians need to resist said invasion. But at the same time, I think you do have to look at the Russian perspective, and I think that is really not what is happening right now that is really bugging the Russians. They are looking back at history. They're looking at what has occurred, say again in Serbia, in Libya, and some of these other places. And again, that is a concern for them. And at the same time, it's just it seems a great hypocrisy, whereas we have an incredibly traumatic and savage situation occurring right now in the Tigray region, and fairly few people on the planet know it's even occurring. They're more interested in what Kim Kardashian is doing. So again, that is what we have for today. Again, we're continuing to monitor some of the ongoing security and battlefield situations that are taking place. Not a lot to update in terms of direct kinetic activity that is occurring on the ground, but we are continuing to watch the situation, and we will have more information very, very soon. Have a good day, everybody.